Okay, welcome everybody. This is Urban Awakening and I'm Jose Reynoso. Today we have Jeff Chilton. He studied ethnomycology at the University of Washington in the late 60s. And in 1973, he began a 10-year career as a large-scale commercial mushroom grower. A founder of Mycomedia, which sponsored 4 mushroom conferences from 1979 to 1985. Jeff is the co-author of The Mushroom Cultivator, published in 1983. And in 1989, Jeff established Nammex, the first company to supply medical mushrooms extracts to the nutritional supplement industry. In 1997, he organized the first organic certification workshop for mushroom production in China. And that's just the summary of a long and extensive resume that you have and background. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. And are you located in Canada? That's right?
Yeah, I'm up in British Columbia, actually. I live on Vancouver Island, a very little small community that's right seaside. And Jose, thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it. It's great.
Yeah, it's so nice to be chatting with you while you're in BC, because I call BC home, even though right now I'm in Spain. Every time they ask me where do you call home, I say, if anywhere, it'll be Vancouver Island. That's where I have my heart.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So, sometimes when I have such interesting characters as yourself, I always have this question. If you meet somebody that doesn't know you and they ask like, so who are you? How do you introduce yourself?
Well, you know what? Normally people like to ask you, well, what do you do? And I tell them, well, I'm in the mushroom business. And then if they get any deeper, I'll tell them, well, I sell bulk mushroom extracts to the supplement industry. And that's kind of the basics of what we do. We sell bulk extract powders that companies buy. They put them in capsules, bottles, put their label on, and they sell them into retail. We're a wholesaler.
Wholesaler. Okay. Yeah. So I bet many of the mushroom products I've tried, I'm sure they come from your farm. So before we get into the aspect of the mushroom cultivation, let's start with a book that you wrote. It was co-author, the Mushroom Cultivator book. I read somewhere, because I haven't been able to get my hands on it. It's pretty rare, like even online. They're like, I've seen the book go for 150 euros in Europe and for $60 in the US or whatnot. Somebody stated that The Mushroom Cultivator by Paul Stamets and J.S. Chilton is easily the best source of information for growing mushrooms at home. I guess it has changed a generation, the book, because I was reading along the internet. Now you can find reviews and everything, and everybody is like, this book is like the Bible for growing mushrooms. If you're serious into growing your own fungi, get this book.
Well, what's interesting is, and this is part of the history of it all. Back in the 1970s, people were just kind of discovering mushrooms, and my generation was discovering mushrooms and the shamanic side of them. And so a lot of people were out looking for mushrooms that produce visions, let's say. Mm-hmm. And in the mid 70s, a couple small little books came out that were about how to grow magic mushrooms. Mm-hmm. And our book, and what was going on, in a sense, all of a sudden, from having to go out and find these things in the fields or wherever they grew, which a lot of people were doing, cultivation started to come in. As first of it was these small books, and then in 1983, I mean, I had 10 years of large-scale commercial mushroom growing at the time. So that book was designed not just for growing edible mushrooms, which it was, but all those same techniques could be used for growing, let's just say, entheogenic mushrooms. Mm-hmm. And so it became quite a popular book, and people moved into cultivation. And man, Jose, today there are millions of pounds of those types of mushrooms being produced in the world today. So that's one of the things that gave the book its staying power, and also it sort of opened up that whole aspect of, oh man, we can actually grow these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading that even though it was written in 1983, um, it's still not outdated. They say there's some techniques, maybe due to technology, we can probably like make more efficient, but still the base, it's the same. And if you want to grow mushrooms efficiently and in a sustainable way, this is the Bible for it. So why don't we go to the beginning? Were you inspired by Robert Gordon Wasson? And for those that don't know who Robert Gordon Wasson was, he was, for my understanding, he was the pioneer in bringing psilocybin or magic mushrooms into the Western world or Western scope after his first encounter with Maria Sabina, right?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story because there was a botanist who was down in Mexico who heard about this in the 30s, and it was Richard Evans Schultes from Harvard University, very famous botanist, and he found a couple of species, not the major species. He didn't find the people that were using them, but he came back and he published on it. Gordon Wasson, with a Russian wife, was looking into mushrooms worldwide and their uses as food, and he heard about the use of psilocybe mushrooms in Mexico, and this fascinated him. So he took a French mycologist with him, and they went down to Oaxaca, up to the Sierra Mazateca and other areas of Oaxaca, and they spent the next 5 years, every summer during the rainy season, they were down there not only hunting mushrooms with the local people, but also they were actually participating in some ceremonies, and he met Maria Sabina. And then here's the amazing thing, is that at the time that this discovery was made, because think about it for a minute, nobody in the world knew that this was still going on, that there were still people in the world, a culture that was using psilocybe mushrooms in healing practices. Nobody had any idea that this was happening.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
He published an article on this in a mainstream American magazine called Life magazine, and the headline that was on the cover said, "Amazing discovery, mushrooms that cause vision found in Mexico." Can you imagine? And like isn't this incredible? Isn't this wonderful? And then he went on to write a 2-volume book with this mycologist that was actually only 500 copies were produced. The set cost $1,000 or so, and the only place you could find it was in rare book rooms. And so when I found out about this, I also found out that a copy of this was in the rare book room of the University of Washington library.
Wow.
And when you went there, you went into this beautiful, it was a beautiful old library in this one special room with all these different books. You would have to sign in, and they would go bring this to you, and you could only read it right there. You could not check it out or anything like that. So that was really a big part of my studies.
Wow. So, and like when I first heard that he wrote that article on Live magazine or newspaper, I was like my mind was trying to make sense of it, because I guess back then there was no negative perspective associated with psilocybin mushrooms or visionary mushrooms, right? And I think nowadays it will be completely different. But back then there was no harm, at least known to us. So that's why it was such a great discovery. That's why there was no filter for him to publish that article, right?
Yes, well, and think about this for a second. You know, in that early 19th century and even 18th century, classical scholars were trying to figure out what were considered some of the important, I don't know whether I say problems, but important issues of history. And one of those histories was, for example, what was the soma that was used in India? Because nobody really knew.
Mm-hmm.
So people who studied this and classical Western scholars were very interested. And so this was part of what became part of Wasson's whole study and discovery. He later, 10 years later, after his work in Mexico, started looking at the whole soma issue and decided through a lot of serious work that it was another mushroom, Amanita muscaria. Now, having discovered that and wrote a book on it, he wrote a book on it, Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality, because that's what he was talking about with this soma. It took you to another world. Mm-hmm. I personally think that the soma could have also been a psilocybe mushroom, and I think a lot of the evidence would point to that as well. And we can talk about soma later, but it was just interesting. He was one of the first people that actually brought this consciousness or this idea, this awareness of mushrooms as part of ancient religions to a broader audience.
Yeah. That actually, you touched upon soma. That was the question that just popped into my mind when you were talking about Wasson's adventures. But before that, you were saying that after this book that Wasson released, it opened the doors to maybe put into a new perspective what the church or where those teachings came from, because after that many people have ventured into learning that maybe the sacred sacrament was involved with psilocybin or Amanita muscaria or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, here's what's really interesting to me, because what we have here is we have, for example, the use of a mushroom as a sacrament in native practices in Central America. And then we discover through Wasson that it was very likely a mushroom that was the center of an ancient Hindu religion. And then at the exact same time, we have a English scholar who is part of a team of scholars that is looking at the recent discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, coming out, his name is John Marco Allegro, coming out and saying the exact same thing about a mushroom being at the heart of Christianity. So think about this for a minute. All of a sudden in the 1960s, we have somebody that is saying a mushroom's at the root of Christianity and the mystical tradition in Christianity, and a mushroom is at the root of the whole Hindu religion and is the soma, and we've actually found it actively being used in Mexico. For me, I found that absolutely astounding that all of this would come out at this same time, and it just validated what I suspected, because part of my studies at university was around religion and ancient religions, and it validated my feeling and the experience of many others that what was described as a religious experience in these early, whether it be Christianity or the Hindu religion, stemmed from mushrooms and possibly other plants.
And that's a very interesting and important point you're mentioning, because for me, I grew up in a Catholic family also, and many many things in religion, like I did understand the message of compassion, love, but many things of the miracles and the I think that the juicy parts of the Bible and the teachings, they didn't make sense according to the steps we were given. Like when you go to church school or whatever. And as soon as I learned about all this discovery with the mushrooms and 1970, 1960s, I was like, that was the missing link. That was the I guess like that was the code that we were not given, and that's why many people drifted away from religion, because it was just based on faith and not experiential practices. And I think it was in a crucial moment of humanity, even though I was not alive in those dates. I think it was a crucial moment that it was, okay, here we are, probably the mushrooms, here we are the experience you're looking for, and now take us around the world.
Yes, yes, no, no, indeed, absolutely right. And when you think about it, first of all, why did we not know about these mushrooms? Why was that hidden? And then what you have to do is you have to go back to the fact that religion and the state have throughout history been suppressing this type of knowledge and have been actively persecuting people utilizing mushrooms or other plants, just like when they did all the Inquisition and the witch hunts that they did in Europe and the United States, where those were geared towards healers, women for the most part, who were the curanderas of the time. They were the healers of the time. And so you can see that what ultimately had to happen with the use of these plants is it had to go underground. And so in a sense, the underground has been there forever, because it's the state and the churches that are constantly trying to control us and control what we do and what we think. And so they completely they wrote the mushroom and these other substances, plants, out of the church teachings. And so what we were left with is we were left with rituals and ideas that didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. Because what was really the main part and the point of it all was utilization of the mushrooms or the plants, and even the stories that they told. When you look at it from a different perspective, you can see that having a psychoactive plant or a mushroom, it makes sense now when you think about it. And they also had to start talking in metaphor and in coded language, because at some point the people that were using these realized that they were being persecuted, and they even had to go underground. So a lot of the information that otherwise would have identified what was going on, all of a sudden now it was gone. And unless you knew about the metaphor and coded language, you were completely in the dark.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it comes to my mind like when you go to church and you have the body of God or Jesus, like
the body, right?
Like I'm sure they intended to give us some other body, but then you will create your own experience, and that will definitely take away the power from those levels or the church. But anyways, yeah, it's super interesting, the part of religion, because it definitely, now things make sense, at least for me. And the people have been sharing this information, they're like, aha, it makes sense. It just makes sense that it was intended for you to have your own experience and not to even have to read a book. You create your own reality, your own religion based on your experience, not on somebody else filtering God's message, right?
Absolutely right. And the point as well too is you can come together in groups and have these experiences together. Just like today, one of the great examples of this is the Native American Church in the U.S. and parts of Mexico, and also the people in Brazil that use ayahuasca in their churches. Now, I think the Native American church is a good example. I'm not so sure about some of the organized religions down in Brazil, because even though they use the sacrament, there's a little bit of that organization
Control,
and groupthink that I think is not positive. But with the Native American church as a method, that seems to me to be a very positive way of having people, giving them this experience. Because, you know, the issue of the 60s was that we were all consuming mushrooms or other psychoactive compounds with no roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing out there that told us how to use these.
Like context.
So we were really flying blind.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an issue. And the other side of that is that when they criminalized it in 1965, well, what that meant is that you had to do it in secret. You had to always be aware of the fact that you could be arrested. People were arrested and put in jail. I mean, you know, talking about Mexico back, you know, when this was all happening and when people got this information about the fact of magic mushrooms in the mountains of Mexico, a flood of people descended on Huautla looking for the mushrooms, including young people in Mexico as well.
Yep.
And the next thing you know, you have all of these young people wandering around the Sierra Mazateca, very high, and local people going, what is going on?
I think even Maria Sabina said that she regretted sharing her little angels because it brought so much pain and let's say like chaos to her town and to the land, I guess, in some sort of way.
Well, you know, the other issue there, Jose, is that all of a sudden, when you have people coming in there, a market builds up where now local people are going, hey, I can go harvest these and now I can sell them, and so it becomes commodified, and this is something that can
it always happens, right? Like just like ayahuasca now in Iquitos, they say that it's like going to a Carrefour and getting ayahuasca. You know, they're selling you by the liter, by the kilo, and there's like pseudo shamans or whatever. So it's I think that's once we taint nature and medicine with our own belief systems that we carry to those lands, I guess, of monetizing.
Well, you know what, and this is where for me, I felt that, and listen, I was in Huautla, but after the fact, because you know what happened down there is that once all of this really started to build up in 1967 or 68, the Mexican government went in and they put in roadblocks.
Oh, wow.
All the roads going into Huautla, they had the army stationed there so that anybody going in and out, they would not let you in. If you're, you know, let's just say a long-haired young person wanting to go to Huautla, and not only that, they went in with the army and they swept through the whole area, rounded up everybody, and if you were an American, they deported you. If you were Mexican, they just booted you out of there, and then they basically sealed it off, and that was in place for probably the next 15 years, where they had it sealed off. Now, when I went up in there, I went up there in 1972. I had an amigo that I knew, a Mazatecan man whose sister was actually a curandera, and I snuck in and went up there to visit and to check it out at a time when really, you know, I had to sneak by the soldados that were there, and had to go in there, and it was, and then the funny thing is that I went back there in 2002, and had a beautiful experience with a woman called Doña Julieta, who was a curandera, and there was literally only one gringo in town.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's maybe like 3 or 4 Mexican hippies.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, now in Huautla, they have a yearly mushroom festival in July. And Maria Sabina is now a major positive figure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not just in Mexico, but in Huautla now. And she's a big part of this whole town, and they're very proud of her. And you know, and part of it too is merchandising.
Merchandise, yeah.
They probably have, you know, Maria Sabina dolls and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, T-shirts, everything.
Yeah, I know, and you know, there's books written about her. And but let me just say this: it's calm. There's not all of these people coming in from all over. They have this wonderful festival. There's probably more locals and people from the surrounding area, but they embrace the mushrooms up there, and that's a beautiful thing.
I think it was a period of adaptation. Also, it was I think the mushrooms were a great disruptive technology, if we can call, because it was going against, or it was just taking the veils of religion, politics, power, and what truth is, because it was redefining history. That's what it did. It was like everybody, like from Timothy Leary, Aldous Huxley, they all say that their trip with in the Mexican lands with mushroom, it was the most important day in their life, and they changed the way we perceive the brain and whatnot, right? But
Absolutely.
You also lived in Mexico, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I you know what, when I went to high school in Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay.
Mexico was just right there, and in high school I was lucky enough to study Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So I had 4 years of Spanish in high school, and there was just something about Mexico that attracted me. So I went down there multiple times in the late 60s, and then in 1971 I went down to Mexico, and I lived in the state of Oaxaca for a year and a half. And literally I had no money. I just lived on a few pesos a day, and I would rent small casitas in different small towns, and it would be, I mean, sometimes it was like 50 pesos a month for a adobe floor casita, right? It was very inexpensive. You could live there very cheaply, and I just kind of traveled around. There was still at that point a lot of young people traveling in Mexico. It was a wonderful time, a lot of camaraderie with not only other gringos, but Mexicanas that were traveling around as well. So it was just a period of discovery. It was also for me where I could experience a different culture. And look, I love Mexico. I just think the cultures in Mexico, the fact that they have so many native cultures that are still intact. And at that point in time, they were very intact still. Today, you know, it's getting a little bit, you know, different today, certainly. But back then, let me tell you, I hitchhiked everywhere I went. I hitchhiked. Sometimes I'd take a bus, but I was doing hitchhiking everywhere. And people who picked me up, they, you know, where it was a long trip, they'd stop and buy me lunch, or they'd buy me dinner, or there, you know, at some point they'd, you know, oh, we got to stop here and stay, you know, come on in, you can sleep here tonight, whatever. I mean, it was just like, people were so friendly.
I think we still have that people, which is like 90%, but then you have that 10% of chances of going into the wrong car and meeting and getting invited to the wrong party, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. And you know what? I feel so bad about Mexico because it's been under the influence of the United States for so long, and they've supported all of these governments like the PRI that have been just a one-party rule in Mexico for all those years. And you know, the fact that now down there, I just feel like with all of the cartels and all the rest of this stuff, it's really unsafe in so many ways. And I feel so bad for the Mexican people over that, because they deserve better.
Oh yeah. Mexico is a great country. I must say, I still travel Mexico with my van and my girlfriend all around, and I stay in small towns, and people still come out and welcome the gringos, even though I don't look gringo, but they see the license plate from British Columbia, and they bring us beer or sandwiches or tacos, whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so when was your first ceremony in Mexico? Because before going to Mexico, you never tried a ceremony outside of Mexico, right? Or did you?
That's right. That's right. I never did. You know what? Actually, during that trip down there, I didn't really have a ceremony. When I did make it to Wildland 71 with my amigo, it turns out that it wasn't the rainy season,
Mm.
so there weren't any around. So ultimately, he and I, and he was a really interesting guy, Joaquin. Mazatecos are very short. They're like, 5'1", 5'2", or something like that. Very sturdy, up and down hills, day in, day out. Very strong people, very interesting people. He and I shared a toke that night, and he actually, this was what was interesting about that. Even though I didn't have an experience with the hongos that trip, when we had that toke and we started talking in his small little shack, literally a shack on the side of the mountain, and I discovered at that point in time that, how we all want to go to foreign lands to seek ourselves to some degree. And I realized at that point in time that I didn't really have to be in Mexico to find that. And that's what I found in Mexico. I found that, in fact, yes, I could do that back where I lived, that what I was looking for was back there. I didn't have to go all the way to Mexico, but in fact, coming to Mexico, I did ultimately come to that realization that it's all really within us, and that it, in a lot of cases, what we're looking for is just in our own backyard, because we're really looking for, our true self, and we're trying to have that experience of the essence of that energy level out there, the samadhi, the bliss. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to get back to the source.
To get back home.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned before, you co-authored the book Mushroom Cultivator with Paul Stamets. Where do you meet Paul Stamets? Because it looks like you guys were like meant to connect in this earth, because you're like the fungi wizards and experts.
Well, you know what? When in 1973, after coming back from my year and a half in Mexico, I realized that I wanted to become a mushroom cultivator. And there's only one mushroom farm in Washington State. I went to that mushroom farm, I applied, I got a job. I was on that farm for the next 10 years. And that was in Olympia, Washington. And during the next 10 years, Olympia, Washington became a center of people interested in psychoactive mushrooms, and also where there were conferences that was the beginning of conferences that brought together Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, the man that discovered LSD, Richard Evans Schultes, the man that pretty much elucidated ayahuasca, and also was the man I was talking about that was in Mexico in the 30s that discovered mushroom use there. So mushroom conferences started to be held there, and I met Paul. He was a student at the time at a local university, and he got wind of the fact that I was there at this mushroom farm. This was about 1977 or something. And so we met, and at the time, he was growing mushrooms in jars and very, the techniques were not very good.
Bootleg mushroom growing.
Yeah, I was working on a large farm. We had had it all dialed in really well, and so we got together, became very close friends, and in fact, we even started up. He and I and two other people started up a organization that actually had mushroom conferences, and then we sort of continued on with it, and our conferences were strictly about mushrooms, and my role in these conferences was cultivation. Paul was a lot of identification, and we had other people talking about identification and things like that. But this was the point I'm kind of telling you about, because in the mid 70s, books were being written too about the fact of we have these psychoactive mushrooms, these psilocybes, in the Pacific Northwest, in British Columbia, in Oregon, in Washington, and people are out there looking for them and discovering them. So we have these field guides being written. Paul wrote one, somebody else wrote one, but at the same time that this was happening, one of the things that I brought to it was cultivation.
Cultivation.
And so in the run up to 1983, Paul and I were close. We were working together on cultivation, and we decided to write this book, which essentially, once that book was published, the ability to cultivate in a major way just opened that whole thing up. And you know what happened was, a lot of people, because of that, all of a sudden you didn't see people out in the fields anymore, walking around looking for the wild psilocybes anymore. That kind of fell away a little bit, and people started cultivating, and all of a sudden the mushrooms were available in a much more major way. The last conference we had, by the way, Jose, the last conference we had in 1983 or 84, I think it was, our keynote speaker was Terence McKenna.
Terence McKenna. I was just actually, my next question was going to be about that last conference, which was named, titled End of Millennium Mushroom Conference, right?
I don't remember that myself, but we had it at a place called Brighton Bush Hot Springs.
Okay. The first time I heard about that conference, and I didn't connect the dots that it was actually you who started this. It was at How to Change Your Mind book by Michael Pollan, which he's interviewing Paul Stamets, and he tells Michael about this mushroom gatherings conference that were happening in the Pacific Northwest, and that everybody was dressed up in costumes of their favorite fungi, because it was all fungi mushrooms. And when you read a book, you kind of like start imagining what it would look like. I was like, oh man, that could be hilarious. But today I found you can find everything now online. I found a whole file of pictures of various characters dressed up as their favorite mushrooms, Amanita muscaria and many others that I probably don't even know. But it looks amazing, and and it looks really fun. And the interesting thing is that you were gathering the top psychedelic pioneers or advocates of the U.S. and probably the world in one place. You had Ken Kisley and his boss Further. You had Sasha Shulgin, Paul Stamets, of course, Dr. Andrew Weil. It was an amazing gathering. So what was the feeling there when you had all these like-minded people talking about mushrooms?
Well, listen, it was a very exciting time, because this was information again that had kind of been hidden and obscured for hundreds and hundreds of years, and all of a sudden it was being dragged out into the open. And whether it was researchers or just the general public, more and more people were getting involved. So and to have these people there as resources. And, the interesting part about it was that when you had these top people there, like whether it be Andrew Weil or Richard Evans Schultes, some of these people, they're right there. If you want to go talk to them, you can go talk to them. It's not like they're in a position where, okay, they come, they give a speech, they're gone. Nothing like that. They're there. It was a 3-day affair. And this one that we had at Brighton Bush, this was the last one for our group called Mycomedia. And at that one, where the costumes came in was that one was held right around Halloween, because that's still the heart of the rainy season in Oregon. And I remember that very first conference at the Brighton Bush Hot Springs, which was our final one. I remember at one point there was a conga line of people dancing, and a couple of the costumes were the Alice in Wonderland caterpillar. and an Alice in Wonderland figure, and it was so amazing to see this caterpillar out there, and it's kind of like leading this conga line of people dancing. But it was just, these conferences were fantastic ways, and you get all these people together, and there are a lot of new ideas and new connections, and so that's really what came out of this. And the interesting part about it was that Olympia, Washington was kind of a focal point during that late 70s, early 80s, and that's where Paul is headquartered. And I moved up to British Columbia in 1983 after we published the book, and I came up here, and I because the fact of the matter is I needed to get away from the U.S. I felt it was, that was Ronald Reagan, and I felt it was not the right place for me to be, whereas Canada looked a lot better. And I had friends up here and a really nice community that I moved to. So I moved up to BC, and then in 1989 I started my business, Nammex, selling basically medicinal mushroom extracts.
Okay, so 1989 you start Nammex, and this takes us to the next chapter. You were already like an expert at cultivation, and then you had this idea of creating cultivation, or or partnering up with or creating your own cultivation facilities in China, and getting them to cultivate these mushrooms for the Western world that much needed this, because mushrooms are food, mushrooms are medicine. So for some of the audience or listeners that don't know, what kind of mushrooms do you start growing at the beginning, and why can they be food and medicine?
Well, during this whole period, the 70s and 80s, I'm reading so much about mushrooms and mushroom growing, and I come across the whole body of work about medicinal mushrooms. Now, to be clear, I consider probably the top medicinal mushroom to be psilocybe, but that's another story. These mushrooms were used in Asia for thousands of years in traditional Chinese medicine. And there's actually a book out there that's written that has 270 species that it names as having medicinal properties. But the way I looked at it was, okay, what are the ones that still have scientific research behind them? And there were about 12 that had a solid body of scientific research. One of the main ones was reishi. And reishi is a polypore. It's woody. You can't eat it, but it's beautiful. It's got this perfect kind of ram's horn type cap. It is bright red, especially when you shine it up. It's a beautiful mushroom. It is in Chinese mythologies. You see it in their architecture in different places and in symbols of it everywhere. And it's considered a longevity herb in China. It's also called the mushroom of immortality. So reishi is a mushroom that really stood out, was very interesting, and there was a lot of work around it. And then I discovered the work with some of the other mushrooms as well, shiitake, maitake, cordyceps. So in 1989, I went to China for the first time, went to an international conference there, a mushroom conference, international mushroom conference. And throughout the whole 90s, I traveled in China extensively, research facilities, farms, factories, conferences. And here's the issue is that I'm a mushroom grower by trade. I know the economics of growing mushrooms. And I realized that you can grow mushrooms for food purposes in North America, but mushrooms are 90% water. Supplements are dry. So when you take and grow those mushrooms and sell them for $5 a pound, and then you dry them out, 90% water. Now it's like what you got $5 for, that now you have to get $50 for a pound of dried mushrooms. The economics don't work. So that people know this, no company in the United States is growing mushrooms for use as nutritional supplements. I realized that. I went to China. I organized mushroom growing in China. And look, China grows 85% of the world's mushrooms. Wow. 85% of the world's mushrooms. And they have tens of thousands of mushroom growers in China. Lots and lots of small producers. In 1997, I went to China with a large organic certifier. We had the first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China, 1997. So I organized that. I partnered up with people who could make extracts for me, and we've been getting all of our mushrooms and mushroom extracts made in China since that time. And again, because you cannot grow mushrooms in North America and be able to sell them economically as supplements. And on that point, I want to be clear about something, because a lot of people will say, oh, gee, I see lots of mushroom supplements that say made in the USA. What they make in the USA is not mushroom, it is mycelium, and they grow it on sterilized grain. And then after the mycelium covers the grain, and this is all done in a laboratory, it's all sterile, they will dry it, grind it to a powder, grain and all, and then these companies will call it mushroom. And the easiest way for somebody to visualize this, Jose, is tempeh. There's a food out there called tempeh. Yep. And let me give you the test. Do you know how tempeh is made?
Yeah. I actually know because I love tempeh. So it's
oh, good. Okay.
It's soy with a mix of rice grains that is all like pureed, and then it's mixed, and then it's fermented. Let ferment in a cold, moldy environment or the fridge kind of thing. I think they have to add a bacteria or something. Is that correct?
Okay, I was going to ask you, what do they ferment it with? Do you know what they ferment it with?
I should know, but I don't remember.
That's fine.
Give me 1 second. I'm just going to put the light. I want to get the light.
Sure. Nobody.
It's getting dark here, and
nobody has actually answered that question. But what the way it's made is they cook soybeans. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they cook a grain, soybeans, and then they put a fungus on it. Mm-hmm. And that fungus,
it's from isn't it from the water? Like in Bali, they say this is from the fungi that is present in water. That's why Western tempeh will never be as beneficial as Balinese tempeh, because the water is too clean. That's what they claim.
Well, you know what? Actually, they add the fungal spores.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it's a fungus that does not produce a mushroom. It's called an imperfect fungus, and they put the spores, they mix the spores on it, and it's a very fast growing fungus. So what you're eating with tempeh is actual fungal mycelium.
Mm-hmm.
So that is cooked soybeans with mycelium on it. So that white stuff on the tempeh is mycelium.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what people in the United States are growing and selling as mushroom.
So we're buying grains basically.
You're buying grains basically. And if you look very closely at the label, it will say, well, sometimes it will say, if you turn it over, it will say mycelium. And if you look in the others, sometimes it will say myceliated oats, myceliated rice. But on the front panel, it will say reishi mushroom, shiitake mushroom, and it will have a picture of a mushroom. And so when you go to buy it, you literally think that you are actually getting a mushroom product when you are not.
Okay, so to share this with the audience, so if it says mycelium in the back or wherever, if it says mycelium, you're not actually getting the mushroom, you're getting grain, right?
That's right.
And the
That's right.
labeling will be like buying a juice that says 100% natural juice, even though it has been pasteurized and maybe added some vitamin C and whatever for this, to stabilize the and enhance the shelf life, right? So it's
You know what, those products are, and here's the thing, we
they're expensive.
measure.
They're expensive. Expensive mycelium products, really expensive.
It's very expensive grain powder. Very expensive grain powder. And the problem is that when we analyze those products, they're very low in beta glucans. And the beta glucans are why mushrooms are medicinal. Without the beta glucans, it's not a medicinal mushroom. That's the line. That's what makes it medicinal. So they're very low in beta glucan. Mushrooms are high in beta glucans. Those products are very high in starch. Mushrooms don't have any starch.
Yeah.
So those products, when you analyze them, they're 30 to 60% starch from all of the grain that is still in the product, and they're very low in actual beta glucans, which is what you are looking for.
So what's beta glucan?
Well, beta glucan is a polysaccharide, and it has the ability to activate the production of immune cells in the human body. So when we take that mushroom supplement, or we drink the tea, or we even eat mushrooms, those beta glucans will go down, and we have receptor sites in our small intestine, and those beta glucans will hit those receptor sites. And if we need an immunological boost, those receptor sites will stimulate the production of immune cells, which are called macrophages, natural killer cells, T cells. So that will activate these immune cells, which will then go out and start to look for any invaders that we have that are in our blood or in our system to destroy them. So that's what the beta glucans do. They activate our immunity, and that's really, you have to think about medicinal mushrooms as much as anything else as preventive medicine. Yeah. Take them, use them. They sit in the background. They're not, it's not like me drinking a cup of coffee and a couple of hours later going, wow, I'm really stimulated, right? Not like it. It's not like taking ibuprofen and going, my headache's gone, or aspirin or something. That's not how mushrooms work. You have to take them for a while. They work in the background, and then they're helping you stay healthy. Look at them as a preventive medicine.
Okay, so basically, we're buying a mycelium or grain mycelium. We're buying mushrooms, or not even, there's the mycelium that doesn't have the actual property, the beta glucan that activates the immune cells, which that's the whole purpose of mushrooms from my perspective, because as you said, you don't take them when you're sick. Many friends tell me, like, what are you doing with all these bags of powders, adding them to your smoothie? Like, you're pretty healthy. Why do you need more? I'm like, well, I travel a lot. I'm in environments and I work with people. I tend to fuel up extra tanks of energy and nutrients and information, let's say. So when the time comes, hopefully never comes, I'm prepared for that. And that's the beauty of medicinal mushrooms, because they have this intelligence that prepares your body and strengthens your body for whenever it's needed. It knows how to not even react, how to counteract whatever.
Exactly.
Thing.
No, that's absolutely right. And then you're doing the right thing. It's just like when people like my sons, they will have a smoothie every day,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll put in this, they'll put in that. That's what we're sort of calling taking charge of our own health, and that's the whole idea of a nutritional supplement or a vitamin. We want to just make sure that we're getting enough vitamin B or A or D, vitamin D. So we go, okay, first of all, we want to get this from our food. Food and nutrition is the basis for our health. But as a precaution, we will supplement too. And with the supplements and with a good diet, that's what's going to keep us healthy. I mean, there's other things involved in human health, like exercise and not only that, where you live. If you live in a city, well, you're breathing in air that's not great, and there's stresses that come with the city. If you're in a car a lot, oh man, the stresses that come in with just being in a car, driving in traffic.
Yeah.
So yes, this is part of it, and we want food to be our medicine, right? And that's why I'm always saying eat mushrooms. Make mushrooms part of your diet. There's some fabulous mushrooms, edible mushrooms, shiitake. Do you eat shiitake at all?
Like I'm plant-based. I don't eat any animal flesh, and shiitake for me that's my meat. I make tacos with it, with the stems, and I make broth. And in that broth, I will probably add some medicinal mushrooms also. I've learned, as you were saying, to make my food my medicine, and it can still taste really, really good, actually even better. But you're actually enhancing your body. But just before I forget, you were like, I don't consider mushroom supplements, even though they're sold many times as supplements, because they're not supplementing anything. They're like what you were saying at the beginning. They actually are enhancing and giving your body instructions to how to work, or awakening that nature intelligence that it has within, right? Because they're not supplements. You're not taking vitamin C that once you stop, it's out. You're holding reserves, and you're instructing and teaching your body how to react in case of. And then there's the other spectrum, the people that instead of taking them as a preventative lifestyle option, they will get sick and they go to Whole Foods or wherever, Whole Check, and they will buy all the medicinal mushrooms, take them all, and they say, oh, they don't work. Because as anything, nature works slowly and its own tempo, and you have to start building your reserves, and it takes weeks, months, and whatever, like even years to really get to an optimal state using these medicines, right?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, that's well stated. That's exactly right. And we do want our food. I mean, that's the foundation. That is really the foundation. And if you're out there, person is out there eating all of those processed foods, you are not doing yourself a favor. You are not helping yourself at all. You're doing a lot of damage to your body.
So what are the different stages or fungal stages? Because as I've I would say I'm pretty new with the mushroom world, even though I've been like 5 years diving deep and interviewing different people. I know Ron T. Garden, and he also grows mushrooms in China. And I saw he had in his office a massive reishi, and I was like, wow, this is God's greatest gift. But then I see that they also sell reishi spores to intake. So what should we be looking for, and what are the different benefits of the different fungal stages?
Well, first of all, for people who don't know, mushrooms do not produce seeds. They produce spores. That's how they reproduce. The spore in nature is in the soil. It's on wood. When conditions are right, the spore will germinate into a very fine filament called a hypha. When multiple spores germinate and those hypha come together, they'll form a network, and that network is called mycelium. The mycelium is the body of the fungus. We would call it the vegetative body, and its role in nature is to decompose. So it is out there, it's repurposing all of that organic matter ultimately into humus for plants and trees to utilize. So it's a recycler. That's what it's doing. So this mycelial body is out there, and it's also building up reserves of energy so that when conditions are right, and here in the Pacific Northwest, that means it's fall, the temperature goes down, it starts to rain, it gets very wet and moist, a mushroom will come up from that mycelium, which has the energy to produce it. The mushroom comes up, and as it matures, it opens up. The gills underneath produce the spores, which they come out, and away they go, and we've completed this life cycle. So in terms of actual, what we would call plant parts of this mushroom, we have a spore, we have mycelium, and we have the mushroom itself. Now, so each one of those has been utilized for medicinal purposes. Mycelium, in some parts of the world, like China, they grow mycelium in very large tanks, and they get pure mycelium, which has medicinal properties. Not as good as a mushroom. Mushroom produces many more complex compounds than mycelium does. Mycelium on its own. So sometimes these companies, they're selling mycelium, they'll say, oh, gee, there's lots of research on mycelium. It's got these. Well, there is, but they don't have all that starch in it. That's not, that's the problem with your products. Spores now, and Jose, the coolest thing in the world that I've seen is in China now, they collect the reishi spores.
Oh, wow.
And they do that. Think about it as the mushroom is standing up and as the cap is open, they will put a shroud around it, paper, kind of a stiff paper around it, so the spores cannot escape. And they put a bag at the bottom of where the stem is right in the center, and a plastic bag. The spores fall down into this bag, and so they collect the spores. And one reishi mushroom can produce half a kilo, 500 grams of spores. It is incredible. Well, the reason they're doing that now is because they did some research in China that indicated that spores have medicinal benefits. I've looked at that research, and there's other scientists that I know in China that's looked at the research, and I'm not convinced that those spores have benefits. Now two things. A spore, if you just consume the spore like you're eating a mushroom and it's got spores and you're consuming, the spores go right through you. We cannot crack that hard shell that the spore is in. So a spore, we can't eat spores, but what they do in China is they put them in a process where they claim to crack the shell of the spore. So they talk about it as cracked spores or broken spores, but and
it's really pricey. It's really pricey when I see
it's ridiculous.
The products of reishi spores.
It's crazy, and you know what? The spores, what's inside of them are actually fatty acids, and those fats are there to give energy when that spore germinates. That's like a seed. A seed has energy in it, enough energy just to get whatever it is, and this seed get the plant growing, and then it starts to absorb nutrients from the soil. Same with the spore. It gets that hypha growing out, and then the hypha gets onto its food source and gets its food from that. But it's mostly fatty acids. And there's claims for all sorts of what's really inside the spore, but I personally don't, from what I've seen of the research, I don't really think that spores are a beneficial medicinal product. So we don't sell them. I don't encourage people to buy them. They're too expensive. A lot of the spore, sometimes they'll sell spore oil, and actually, the problem is maybe you get this bottle of spore oil, and actually what it is be a soft gel, and inside would be the spore oil. I know people that have bought that, and they said, you know what, most of that oil turned out to be just vegetable oil. How do you really know what's in that capsule? How do you really know how much is reishi spore oil? Even if it were 100% spore oil, does it really have any benefits? Personally, I don't think so.
Yeah, I guess they realize that the Western world likes expensive and very unique products, and they're banking on it, right? They have to make their Christmas, like we say in Mexico.
Well, yeah.
And
Although, let me just say this
mhm.
quickly, that the spore business just it started out in China, and companies in China were selling these spore products, and they claimed that this reishi spore would do everything in the world that you can imagine. And so that's really where it got its start. And now it's kind of filtered over to the US. And I just think that until there's some really good research, avoid it. It's not really credible, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think we'll need lots of independent research, because if you pay the right scientists and you tell them what to look for, they will always find that. That's what has been happening with the FDA for as long as I remember, I guess,
Absolutely.
So, I have to confess that I've always been, I don't know, maybe because it's from my own superstitions or own dogmatic way of thinking regarding China, that like, oh, I want Canadian grown mushrooms, or that's how I found your company actually in the beginning, where I want US grown fungi. Is there, you started since 87 or 89, you said, the organic training in China. Can we trust organic Chinese mushrooms?
Well, you know what? The fact is that ultimately it's a matter of testing, and we test. First of all, the organic certification in China is not Chinese certifiers; it's German certifiers.
Okay.
So it's a high quality certification organization. And then before our products even leave China, they are tested for pesticides, they're tested for heavy metals, they're tested for microorganisms, all being tested in third-party laboratories that are international laboratories, not like in-house in China or anything like that. And then when our products get over to North America, we test them again with different laboratories over here. So our products are all tested twice. And look, I understand people should always be aware of the fact that there are food products, there are supplements that, I mean, so much of our food and is being grown with chemicals. I mean, the millions of tons of chemicals are put on crops in Canada, in the United States. Unless you're buying organic, you can be sure that you will be getting a certain amount of pesticides or other problem chemicals in your food. Right now, they've shown in the United States that there's all sorts of contamination now with glyphosates, which are a product of this Roundup, which is a chemical that gets sprayed on a lot of crops in North America. So I totally understand, and I've been certified organic since 1992. We certified growers in China in 1997. I believe in organic certification. I believe in clean food. I'm totally against the use of chemicals on food. So for me, I have to be selling a clean product. So no, everybody has to be vigilant about what they purchase, and I'm also somebody who totally believes in buying local. If I can buy local, I will. I don't like it when I see an apple in my market that comes from New Zealand. I mean, why?
Yeah, yeah. Why?
I want local food. But again, the issue is simply that it's too expensive to grow mushrooms as supplements in North America. So I have to take my organic ethic to China and say, look, you need to start thinking about this. And you know what? China is really, believe it or not, they're doing a lot. And there are lots of companies that are growing organically now and are looking at this method of production. And that's important. We have to push them, just like in China now, they're the world's #1 producer of solar cells. And they have more solar cells in place than anywhere else. They have electric trains when I'm over there. I'm riding around in China on a train that's going 300 kilometers an hour.
Wow.
It's
Electric train.
fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And so people can talk about China all they want, but I just say, look in your own backyard, because your companies in your country are using tons of chemicals.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that and give me a peace of mind. So I started using mushrooms because my own curiosity of enhancing my performance, and I love studying books and learning about any kind of spiritual or high performance techniques and whatnot. I love doing sport, and I also host retreats where I need a lot of energy during those days because I become the father of X amount of people for a number of days, and I need a lot of energy and peace of mind that after that I'm not gonna have my immune system jeopardized. um, I'm gonna tell you the mushrooms I usually tend to get at the shop, and if you could tell us a little bit about them, of the ones you want, maybe. Reishi, you already mentioned it. Lion's mane, it's becoming a big trend because sadly enough, many of our parents or elderly people are not even that elderly, just relatives are having brain issues. What's lion's mane for?
Well, lion's mane actually has compounds that stimulate what's called nerve growth factor.
Mm-hmm.
And nerve growth factor is a chemical that we have in our head that will stimulate the production of nerve cells, neurites. And nerve cells are being destroyed and created all the time in our body. But as we get older, I think the destruction gets a little bit faster than the reproduction of those neurites. And so ultimately we start to have memory issues and cognitive issues, and people get dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. Lion's mane has demonstrated in actual clinical trials that it can enhance people's cognition, and there have been actual clinical studies with using a very low amount, using 3 grams of just dried mushroom powder to enhance that. So right now, and this is all part of what are called nootropics. There's a real big category out there of nootropics, and that's sort of like anybody that can anything that can actually stimulate our performance in some way. And what's interesting, of course, is that now microdosing of psilocybe is considered part of nootropics as well, and so a lot of people are doing that. But lion's mane is our top selling product right now. Okay. We can hardly keep it in stock. Everybody wants lion's mane, and it just goes to show you too how everybody out there, whether it's young or old, feels like if we can get some sort of cognitive benefits, we want them. Mm-hmm. For me, the nootropic that I love is it's called coffee.
Coffee. Topic about coffee. There's I'm sure there's a brand that is promoting a mix of chaga and coffee as a mixture. Is there any benefit in that, or is it just like the boost of the coffee plus the magic of the chaga?
You know what? There are a lot of innovative products out there, and I mean, our customers are putting mushrooms into everything.
Yeah, I make chocolate with it. Many people do. I make soups. I'm salad dressings. I just put it all over the place. And sometimes that reminds me of what Paul Stamets said to Michael Pollan in his interview, saying that he truly believes that the fungi is using us as a vehicle of propagation, that they are taking over the world using us as the vehicle.
Yeah, I personally don't subscribe to a lot of Paul's theories, like mycelium is the internet of the world. Look, we live in a very large organism made up of multiple species. We're all working together in this. Gaia is something where we're all working together. The idea that we're kind of isolating this one thing, like, oh yeah, mycelium, it's an isolated thing, and it's the internet. That's like total baloney in my opinion. It's even like when it's out there decomposing things, mycelium is working with bacteria, it's working with insects. Communication, I mean, do you really think there's one organism that is in charge of all the communication on this earth? No.
Too much responsibility.
Every organism is communicating in various ways. We don't necessarily see that, but and that's one of the things that I feel like when I am be-mushroomed, I experience that directly. I can see, I can visualize, I can feel the fact that there's this connection with us on levels that we don't understand, don't necessarily see in our normal state of consciousness, but we're all connected, and there's communication going back and forth all the time between organisms, and it's not the mycelial internet that Paul wants to visualize. That's just to me, it's such a juvenile idea.
Okay, next one. Chaga. What are the benefits of chaga, and why would somebody like to take it?
Jose, chaga is something that is been used traditionally for stomach ailments. Okay. That's really where chaga comes in. So if somebody has stomach issues like irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or something like that, man, try chaga. See if that helps you. It's been used for ulcers, stomach ulcers, things like that. Try chaga. It was also used
How would they have to take it for stomach issues? What would be the...
I would say make a tea out of it.
Tea. Okay.
Yeah, and you know what? The great thing about chaga is you can buy wild crafted chaga chunks out there, and I rather than buying a product that I mean you can also buy a chaga powder. That's cool too. But an encapsulated chaga product, get yourself the chaga chunks, make your own tea from it.
I like the chaga chunks.
The powder, throw it into your smoothie. If you got on the internet too, man, I mean, what is it? They say chaga is the king of mushrooms and things like that. It's not the king of mushrooms. Chaga is a good medicinal mushroom. It's got its place, but it's not a panacea. It doesn't do everything. It's just one of many different mushrooms that can provide you some benefits. But please don't look at it as a panacea, which is what a lot of these internet sites want to say about it. I mean, there's so much hype out there on the internet, especially when people are trying to sell products. It's like, cut through the hype. Don't believe. Be skeptical.
Be skeptical. Well, that's why I wanted to have you in the podcast, because you're like you come from lots of knowledge from many years of testing and probing and telling us that spores right now you wouldn't bet on it. Difference between wild crafted chaga from Vancouver Island to chaga from Siberia?
Well, you know what? What we found, we did some testing years ago, and what we found was that the chaga that was growing on alder trees was not as powerful as the chaga that was grown on birch trees.
Oh, okay.
So depending on the tree it's growing on, it may not be as potent. And what's interesting about chaga is it's not a mushroom. It's not even mycelium or a sclerotia. And a sclerotia, for people that don't know, a sclerotia, some fungi, they will produce a very hard mass of mycelium that grows underground. And it's like a truffle. And that's called a sclerotia, and it's pure 100% mycelium. Sometimes chaga is called a sclerotia. We even have it on our products as a sclerotia, but actually it's a canker. The mycelium is inside that tree, and that tree at some point reacts to that mycelium, which is consuming the tree, reacts, and it pushes out this canker off the side of the tree, which is mostly woody tissue with some mycelium in it, and it forms this really gnarly black canker form, irregular, which is really weird. And for those people that think, oh yeah, yeah, and you're damaging the tree, look, when you're harvesting it, no, you're not. You're not damaging the tree at all. That canker is growing off of there. This tree is diseased. When you see that canker, that's a dead tree standing. It is not healthy. It is permeated with this mycelium, which will ultimately kill that tree. When you take that chaga off, it's no different than really removing a wart. But the fact is that tree is already
gone.
Dead. It's already, I mean, it's not dead at that point. It's living, and it may be alive to some degree, but it is dying because that chaga is going to completely take it over until finally the tree collapses and gets consumed completely. But if you see that chaga on there, it's a diseased tree. Chaga is a parasite.
Okay. It also has some anti-cancer properties, or that's something that we're still debating?
Well, traditionally, chaga has been used as a folk remedy for cancer.
Okay.
There are claims that chaga is the top antioxidant out there.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure because you know what? The fact is that they all base that on what's called an ORAC test, ORAC, and ORAC tests have been demonstrated to have very little validity. So you can't base a statement like that on a ORAC test, which is what a lot of people do. It scores very high on ORAC, but that may be just very meaningless. I mean, all mushrooms have antioxidant abilities. So, and chaga probably does as well. But is it the number one? I don't know that that's true either.
Okay. And
isn't it interesting how it's like, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, it'll do everything for you.
It'll do everything. Well, yeah, they have to sell the product. It's the same story with the spores. As soon as there's a small beep somewhere, they will say that was the beep that created the world. And yeah, it's marketing, I guess. That's why we have to do our research and test it for ourselves. And I guess in the end, if you believe that it's the one mushroom or a mycelium or whatever that will heal the world, you can believe it. It's up to you.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. That's absolutely right. But I think the important thing and what I really try to do is just educate people.
An
educated decision.
Yeah. I guess that's the best thing. And what about cordyceps? Because when I was contacting you, you mentioned that cordyceps 45 it's too hard to grow compared to what's the other one? Cordyceps.
Well, there's Cordyceps sinensis, which you can't grow, and then there's Cordyceps militaris.
Yeah.
Which is what we grow, and growing mushrooms is not easy. And here it is. All of this time, nobody's been able to grow Cordyceps until just recently, and now for the first time ever, we're growing tons of Cordyceps. So Cordyceps is so rare that it reached a point a few years ago where they were selling it for $20,000 a dried kilogram.
Oh, wow.
20,000. You know what? That price was just absolutely ridiculous because nobody could consume it regularly without breaking their bank and putting them into poverty. Simply wouldn't happen, So the fact that we can now cultivate it is very important. And Cordyceps militaris has been used traditionally, just like Cordyceps sinensis, which is the wild-crafted caterpillar fungus. And so for people who don't know, Cordyceps basically when you harvest it, it grows off a caterpillar. And the caterpillar with the wild Cordyceps is part of that medicine. So when you are consuming the traditional Cordyceps sinensis, you are actually consuming that caterpillar too. But what's interesting is the caterpillar hibernates over the winter. It's got spores on it. The spores then will germinate. They will consume the caterpillar. So the caterpillar never wakes up. And then in the summer, this little blade of grass like Cordyceps grows off the caterpillar. And so when people are out there wildcrafting for it, they're on their hands and knees. When they see this little tiny thing, which looks like a blade of grass, they then go and they dig around it and they pull out the caterpillar, and that's part of what they're looking for, the caterpillar and with this little fungus growing on it. So the actual name for it in China is winter worm summer grass.
Winter worm summer grass.
Winter worm summer grass.
Very descriptive.
And the caterpillar is still looks like a caterpillar, but you know what? The funny thing is that the total insides of the caterpillar has been consumed.
Wow.
It's the mycelium has consumed the whole inside, and it's actually a sclerotia inside. It's a hardened mass of mycelium, but the caterpillar body, the skin, is still there. So you have this caterpillar with this little tiny blade of grass like fungus growing off of it, and that is the traditional winter worm summer grass that they use traditionally as a medicine. And what they use it for is fatigue. When people are coming out of a long illness, they'll give them cordyceps to help them escape that period where they're tired, they lack energy, they can't seem to get healthy again. They give them cordyceps. The idea of fatigue has then translated over here to the West, where people use cordyceps for athletic types of issues, but maybe just general. If you generally feel weak and a malaise and like your immunity doesn't feel right, cordyceps could be a good supplement for a person.
Okay, awesome. So if you had to recommend a combo of 2 mushrooms for, let's say, like young entrepreneurs or somebody that's like about to start a venture and they know they need a boost because probably they live in the city, hopefully not, but they live in the city. What 2 mushrooms would you recommend?
I'd recommend, I think, well, I mean, let me have 3.
Let's say 3. Okay, 3 is better than 2. Yeah.
I would say reishi, cordyceps, and lion's mane.
Okay, reishi, cordyceps, and lion's mane. Okay.
And lion's mane. I think those would be the top 3 that I would recommend to somebody. I mean, you know, lion's mane is really trending right now because of the nootropics thing. So yeah, go ahead and use lion's mane. That could give you a boost. You know, what's interesting is that it's not the only one that will stimulate nerve growth factor. Reishi's shown those same abilities. And then cordyceps, you'll have that underlying anti-fatigue energy thing. So those 3, I think, would be a very good combination.
Is maitake also good for the brain? I think so, right?
I would have to look. I don't remember specifically that maitake is there. Maitake is one of those that has great immunological activity, real strong anti-cancer benefits. I mean, maitake is really solid in that area. So definitely. But you know, the thing about it is that maitake is available, like in Vancouver. You can buy maitake in the markets.
Fresh,
there.
yeah.
And you can buy shiitake. So people should be eating maitake and shiitake daily. I mean, you know what? I have mushrooms at least every second day as a meal. So
you mean fresh mushrooms? Fresh mushrooms. Okay. Okay.
Absolutely. And you know what? When I sit down and put them in a meal, I'm cooking up. I could eat a half a pound.
Oh yeah, easy, yeah.
You know, and I also like the agaricus, and you can get organic agaricus now. Agaricus to me is a delicious mushroom as well. I mean, I still like that. I grew that mushroom for 10 years. I grew millions of pounds of it. I know it very well.
Yeah, one of my favorite.
What?
One of my favorite things to do is in fall, if I'm in North America, I usually do a road trip down the Pacific coast from Vancouver.
Cool.
Up in all the farmers market from Vancouver, obviously, to Portland. That's when it starts changing. It's amazing the colors of the mushrooms, of all these mushroom growers or foragers. You can see yellow maitake, purple. I don't know. It's just so beautiful to see the wide array of of mushrooms that you can incorporate into your food as a daily supplement.
Absolutely.
And it's
You
so
know,
tasty.
well, yeah, and that is the where you can get these different species of mushrooms, because there's a lot of smaller growers that are in those farmer market. There's a couple of bigger growers that are growing. You know, in the United States, there's bigger growers that'll grow shiitake, and some bigger growers will maitake and a few others. But in those small little markets, there's always some local person that's growing mushrooms and bringing it to the local market.
Cool. Thank you very much. Amazing information. And I'll definitely add some links of your website, because in your website, you have so much information regarding these mushrooms and many, many more. Before, I wanted to mention this when you were talking about the conference you used to host. And I was like, you know, it's a pity that I was not alive back then, because I would have loved partaking in the costume and everything. Is there any chance of you hosting something like this, like a remember conference, bringing all the glories from those times and seeing where we are in the mushroom experience?
You know, no, actually not, and it's too bad. I agree, but you know what? Actually, let me say this: there are a couple of mushroom conferences in the U.S. that are like that. One of them is called the Telluride Festival, that they have in the summer every year in Telluride, Colorado. And a couple of things they do: they have people in costumes, and they have a parade through this little town of all the people that attend this conference, and people are dressed up in all of these different costumes. So the Telluride Festival for sure. And I think you might check too, people could check on Brighton Bush Hot Springs. You know, after our final conference, the one where we had Terrence McKenna, and we stopped doing the conference, they started doing conferences, and they started doing it on a yearly basis, and it was always around Halloween. And it was kind of a Halloween conference, mushroom conference. They may still be doing it there too, but I know for a fact that Telluride is doing these every year, and it's in August, I think.
August. Can you share why you stopped doing those mushroom conference?
Well, for one, you know, I moved to British Columbia, and our group that was doing them kind of dissolved. Paul may even have done a couple, carried on and done a couple. I don't really remember. But the thing is, you know, at that point, I moved to British Columbia, establishing my business there. I have a young family. I have two sons. They were young. They were born in the early 80s. So I just was busy with so many other things, and building the business there and establishing my new life there was the focus of my life at that time.
Okay, beautiful. Well, we got the pictures, and I'll put a link to the pictures. Maybe I'll send you even the link. I'm sure you're gonna have a good laugh watching all these pictures. So there's a group of you guys with drums and djembes and everything. It looks like a wonderful celebration. One last question. Knowing what you know now, and I definitely asked this question to many guests. Knowing what you know now, giving your experience and what you've lived through these years, what would you tell yourself, let's say, 30 years ago? 20, 30 years ago?
I guess what I would say is...
what advice would you give yourself? Yeah.
I would say have confidence in yourself and your environment. Stay tuned in to the natural world. Get out and be in nature as much as possible, which I did actually. But I guess again, just stay focused on what's important, and spread as much love as possible with your friends and family.
Beautiful. I think you've done a great job spreading the love, spreading the mushroom information and mushroom power. So it's been a great chat, and it's been very inspiring to hear your story and know where you started and where you're standing now. And thank you for promoting organic and sustainable farming in China, so us, the rest of the world, can enjoy mushrooms without having to pay $20,000 per kilo. And yeah, I'm excited to maybe visit you one day when I'm up in that area of the world. And thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jose. And it's my pleasure to make this connection with you. And you're absolutely welcome to come up to Tofino. I'd love to have you up here. And you know, we've got so much that we could talk about. This is just a small amount. I'd love to hang out with you. So
Oh yeah,
let's
definitely.
keep that in mind and let's make that happen.
Blessings.
Blessings.